The Sus4 chord cycle that we're going to look at today is about learning and developing the skills to play Sus4 chords in any key and in any inversion. So let's take a look at it. Now the purpose of this video is to strengthen your chord playing skills for Sus4 chords. And it's a chord progression where we're only using Sus4 chords in major chords. Now Sus4 chords, as you may know, are suspended chords. And Sus4 chords are one in which you suspend the third in place of the fourth. And suspended chords create tension, and the purpose of creating tension is to create interest.
All right, so here we have C major. Here we have our root, third, and fifth, and numbers are really important when you're talking about chords. So in order to create a suspended chord, or also known as a Sus4 chord, we're going to play the fourth tone, which is this note here, and we're going to suspend the third. So here we have our C Sus4 chord, and just like we showed the C major chord in root position, this is C Sus4 in root position. But you don't just have to play them in root position. You can also take this note, move it up an octave, and therefore you have C Sus4 in first inversion. And yet again, you can take the fourth, move it up an octave, and therefore you have your C Sus4 chord in second inversion. All right, so we're going to take a look at that on the keyboard. First of all, it helps to know your major and your suspended chords in order to, successfully execute this movement. And it also helps to know inversions of both. So we're going to start out with C Sus4. Now, I also want to say that Sus4 chords are often referred to just simply as sus chords. So I'm just going to refer to them as sus chords from here on out, because the 4 is often implied. And if you see it written on some kind of sheet music, well, usually it's just going to say sus on it. And that just refers to it being a Sus4 chord, as opposed to a Sus2, which I really won't get into in this video. But that's just the difference between referring to it as a Sus4 chord and just simply referring to it as a sus chord. So we're going to start out with C sus here, and here's C major. You take the third, which is E, and you move it up a half step. All right, can you hear that tension in that chord? It wants to resolve. Okay, and you don't have to play sus chords in root position. Obviously, you can play them in different positions in different inversions. If I take the root here and I move it up an octave, I have our C sus in first inversion, all right? Our root is on top. Or you can take the fourth, move it up an octave, and you can play the sus chord in second inversion. Okay, but we're going to start out with the sus chord, C sus, in root position. And then we're going to resolve it to the third just by moving the fourth down to the third. So we're going to resolve it down to our major chord. Here we have C major. All right, we're going to go around the circle of fifths. And if you're not familiar with the circle of fifths, here's a very brief explanation of how we're going to use it. Now, the circle of fifths represent a lot of musical elements. They represent keys of music, chords, progressions, and so on. And here we're going to use the circle of fifths as a progression of one chord to another in this Sus4 chord cycle. We're moving clockwise around the circle. We're moving from C to G to D to A and so on, and we're moving all the way around. And we can do this because these chords that are next to each other on the circle are related to one another, so they can easily and smoothly blend in from one to the other, no matter really what chord you're playing. It can be a major chord, or it can be the Sus4 chord like we're doing, and that's what I'm going to show you here. Okay, again, we're at C sus. We're resolving to the C major, right? Moving the fourth to the third, and then we're going to go to G major. That's the next note on the circle of fifths. And how are we going to do that? Well, here's G major. Here's our G sus chord, right? G, B, D is our major chord, and G sus chord is G, C, and D. But we're not going to play it in root position because we're already down here at C major. What we're going to do is we're going to move the E down to the D, right? Because G sus is G, C, and D. Well, if I'm here in C major, all I have to do is move the E, the third, down to D, and I have a totally different chord. I have G sus, okay? So far, C sus, C major, G sus, G major, all right? If you look at the circle, the next note is going to be a D. So we're going to have D sus. Well, here's D major, and here's D sus, all right? D, G, and A. Well, so we're here. All we have to do is move the B down to A, and we have our D sus chord. And to resolve it to the major, what note do we move? Well, we just move the G down to the F sharp, and we have D major. So far, C sus to C major, G sus to G major, D sus to D major. Okay, so we've already gone through several iterations or several inversions here. We've started out with root position of the sus chord and the first inversion of a sus chord, and then we went to the second inversion of a sus chord. Now we're going to go back to the root position of a sus chord. For a D, the next note around the circle is going to be A. So, well, here's A major, here's A sus. So all we really have to do, here's D major, all we really have to do is to move the F sharp down to E, and we have A sus. Now we're back at a chord, a sus chord in root position again. Okay, so we're going to be moving through all of these inversions. In just a minute, I'm going to explain, obviously how you can go through and play these in any inversion. So here we have A sus down to A major, okay? So if we continue on around the circle, and I'll speed this up a little bit because, I think you get the point. We're going to move the C sharp down to B, and we have E sus, okay? And we're going to move into E major. Our next chord is going to be B sus to B major. G flat sus to G flat major, okay? And we're getting kind of dark as we're moving down, so we're going to move things up in just a little bit. So far, okay, in order to create our next Sus4 sus chord, we're going to move the B flat down to A flat. We have D flat sus, resolving to D flat major, okay? And then we're going to move this F down flat and create A flat sus, A flat major. Move the C down to B flat, E flat sus to E flat major. Move the G down to F, right, and we have B flat sus to B flat major. Move the D down to C, F sus to F major. So that's all of them. Now let's move everything up an octave because I'm going to put some notes in the left hand. So we're going to be playing some bass notes, and we're going to be moving down the keyboard, and I don't want to move out of the shot. So we're going to start here in this register, and I'm going to be playing just some octaves, bass notes. I'm either going to be playing the root in octaves or the root in fifth or whatever, just whatever I feel like doing. But the point is, you want to make it sound musical. Okay, you'll notice that when I was starting off, I started off with C sus in root position, but you don't have to. Matter of fact, I would encourage you not to start off with C sus in root position every time you do this cycle, because see, if you start off, and it doesn't have to be C sus, it can be any chord, but if you start off with a chord, let's say in first inversion, well, the next chord is going to be different than it was in the last cycle. For example, we started off with C sus in root position, resolving to the third. Well, the next chord was G sus in first inversion. But if you start off with C sus in first inversion and you move to G sus, well, it's going to be in second inversion. So what it's going to do is going to give you the opportunity to play all of these sus chords in different inversions. So it may look like this. So how would this sound in a real progression? Because you're not going to be playing sus4 chords and, resolving. You're not going to be playing a sequence this long, obviously. So how would that sound? Well, if I have something like C major to G major to D minor, well, I could interject some of these sus chords. It could be something like that, where you have some chords and you want to throw some sus chords in there. This is going to help you create these spontaneous moments where you can play sus chords in front of major chords. And that's just scratching the surface of it. You can go a lot farther than that. This exercise and this movement is about learning and knowing sus chords and being able to interject those at any time in front of or behind any chord. Hi, I want to send you this very colorful instructional guide. It has these keyboard diagrams called key shots with colored dots that represent the number system. If you're familiar with the number system, you know it's the key to understanding and playing professional sounding chords and chord voicings. The colors convey this information without having to read notes. Click the link in the description so I can send you this free guide. Until next time, go play.